Hello, world, and welcome to the Crisis Victory Show. Today, episode 5, we're going to be leading into an interview done by my producer and co host, Mr. Pete Turner, who is the founding father of the Break It Down show. And listen, folks, you've got to watch his podcast episodes, they're absolutely amazing. Pete, I'd like to introduce you at this time and let the world know the importance of just exactly who you are to this show. And also, Pete, the reason why we're doing this interview today. So, with that being said, Pete, I turn it over to you, brother.
Well, thanks, Hal. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to work with you, and I appreciate your support and all your words. What we thought we'd do today was turn the camera around. It's something we do in the Break It Down show quite a bit, and we'll flip around and have one of the hosts be the guest because there's insight there. And in your case, because of your background, because of all of the damaging things that you've done or have had done to you or around you, you are a victor. You are a person who has triumphed over all of these things. So I thought we might spend some time digging really deep into these damaging incidents and how does one redeem oneself? How does one, because redemption really is a big theme for what you've done and where you are now, but also just the surviving of all of these things. Gosh, you and I both, with what we've done, we both could be dead. But we're not. Here we are.
That's certainly agreed.
Yeah. And so letting people see that part of who you are, I think, is going to help illustrate what the Crisis Victory Show is about. And by the way, everybody should go check out crisisofvictory.com. That link is down below. This is how you support us. You also can go click subscribe on YouTube. We're going to be on all the other channels. If you're on Rumble, on X, any other kind of channel, you can find us there. And if you don't find us there, send an email in and we'll take care of that for you. All right. So without further ado, Hal, let's start. And because we know each other, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trust building with you. I'm just going to lean on the trust that we already have.
Agreed.
And we're just going to dig in. There was a significant assassination attempt on your life in the recent past. And I think right there is life and death, closer to death than life moment where you were supposed to be dead. And yet here you are.
Yeah, that's a good starting point, Pete. And thank you very much for your introduction. The purpose that Pete and I are trying to create to all of you today is to let you know through my own survivorship, if you will, of assassination attempts, captured and tortured on foreign soil, kidnapped, coming up in the cartel ranks since the late 1960s, what I've witnessed, what I've been involved with, what I have survived. And as a result of the surviving of these things, the wisdom, if you will, gained and attained by coming through so many obstacles in life was the preemptive strike for creating this show. We want to show you, world, that you can come from an extreme crisis event and you can manifest it into humanitarian scale, where ultimately that knowledge and that wisdom gives God glory. It gives a purpose to the purpose of the show, showing that you out there that have also gone through extreme events are now able to manifest that into something that is beneficial for the planet and for the growth of goodness to the planet. So with that being said, in 2005, I heard a knock at the door around midnight. Normally, I would never get up and answer a door like that, but because I have overdose cases brought, rape victims brought to my home at different hours, I just impulsively got up. I got to the door, and on the other side of my security door, I'm looking at a guy in a tow truck uniform, name of the company above one shirt pocket, his name above the other, wearing the tow truck logo on the hat, but the hat was pulled down to where I couldn't even see his eyes, which should have been a flag in the first place. But bear in mind, I had just come out of a dead sleep. So he said, are you the owner of the yellow Corvette Stingray out back? I said, I am. He says, well, I'm a tow truck driver. I was here and I backed into your car. And I would like for you to come down, take a look at the damage, and we can get the paperwork started. Right away, I opened up the security gate, walked down the stairs. Didn't have any red flags at that time. He was very confident and casual in his neurolinguistic body movements and motions. The tone of his voice was very relaxing. I felt that I was legitimately going down to look at damage into my parked car. When I got around back of the car, I couldn't see any damage to it at all. And he says, well, it's right underneath. You need to drop down, take a look at it. And as soon as I dropped down to one knee, I knew I was getting hit. That's when the red flags came, Pete. And as a result of that, the strike was instantaneous. He grabbed me around the neck and held my head forward, trying to stab me at the base of the skull and the back of my neck, which is known to those of us that have been militarily trained as the Chinese wind gate. The Chinese. And what you do is you hit a guy there and they instantaneously immobilize. Speech stop, any body function stops. You're still alive. Mercy of the person that's been sent there to take your life. So what happened is as soon as he hit me and he started forcing my head forward, I just went into that automatic thought of, my God, this guy's militarily trained. I kicked my head back up and tried to spin and turn, but he had my body pinned. And then he pulled out a knife that he had between his two fingers with about a 1.5 to 2 inch blade. I saw the flash of the metal, and then I felt the first strike on the skull. And as I'm down, I'm trying to shift my body to where I can not absorb the blows as much as try to defend myself. Now, bear in mind, I'm 65 years old. This guy is probably, as I would estimate and measure, 30s, early 40s, but skillfully trained in martial arts, skillfully trained in weapons. He knew what he was doing, Pete. This guy was a professional. So as soon as he hit me with the first knife strike, he grabs my body and starts dragging me to the pickup next to my Corvette, because on the other side, there's a fence there. And this is what we call a kill box. It's a place where you take somebody out of the view of other potential help or assistance, and you do a quick kill, and that's the end of that. I saw that he was dragging me towards a kill box, and I turned at that time, trying to force him back, and was able to get up, but he was still behind me and holding me. And so he spun my body, rammed it into the Corvette, dropped me back on the ground again, and started stabbing me in the head. I think it was the third, maybe the fourth knife strike when a big chunk of my head separated from the scalp. It hit the ground. I saw it, and all of a sudden my eyes were covered in blood. I was losing strength at that point. Bear in mind, folks, I'm 65 years old. And I hit the ground, and the final strike that he delivered to me, I started losing consciousness. And in that moment, Pete, I thought that that was the actual final moments of my life. And obviously he read that in my body slackening and my no more attempts at that point to save myself or deflect him. So I went down, and I don't remember nothing from that point other than I don't know how long I was under, but I felt like a lightning strike going through my body. And this kind of regenerated me to where I could open up my eyes, and still they were blood filled, but I could kind of see a haze through it. And I remember I have a fiveplex, and I remember crawling to my back door tenant's unit there, and I couldn't get up. I could just crawl, but I knocked on the door, and they opened the door, and immediately they came rushing out, and there was language that I don't remember what they were saying, but they were getting me upstairs to my secured area. And my son came out at that time, and he was screaming, my father's dying, my father's dying. And he was on the 911 call, getting a hold of the paramedics to come there and secure me. And the police and paramedics arrived at the same time. I remember coming in and out of consciousness and saying, this is a kill order. This is a kill order. I needed someone to understand that just because the target of interest that had found me was no longer there, his presence could still be within a close distance, and he could make another strike at me. So the next thing I kind of remember, Pete, was being loaded in the back of an ambulance. I was in and out of consciousness at that point and bleeding profusely. They had tried to suppress the bleeding, but it was going through the head bandage and all that. You've been in combat, you know what I'm talking about. They got me to the hospital. They had a forensic nurse meet me as they were bringing me in through the emergency access point of the hospital. And she was trying to get information. And I kept telling her, this is a failed kill order. I need protection. This is a failed kill order. She didn't even put it in her report. But they did. Her to the ICU, put me in the room. And I lost consciousness at that point for a day and a half. And I do believe now, looking back, I think it was a medically induced coma. So I don't want to say that it was a natural coma. But I remember the moment that I woke up, I looked around, saw that I had no bodyguards, no protection, and immediately grabbed my cell phone that was in a plastic bag on the table next to my bed, called up my lifelong friend, Pat Grady, And I told Pat, I'm unsecured, need to get me down here and get me the hell out of here. Now, they didn't want to release me because of the severity of the wounds, but I'm a doctor. It's kind of hard to argue my point at that point when they recognized just exactly who I was. And so reluctantly, they allowed me to sign myself out. Pat wheelchaired me out of the place, got me in the car, and we got me back home. Now, another point, Pete, that I'd like to bring up at this time is a very, very dear friend of mine. I call him Brother Bob, Captain Robert. He was a former POW. 2003. He was one of 7 of us that were awarded a citation and received those survivor patches that we all hold near and dear to our hearts. He ended up spending 3 nights in his car out back of my house with a pistol in his lap and refused to leave the side of his brother. Now, over the last 21 years since the day of the award that we received at the VA hospital in Seattle, Bob and I were the last 2 left alive. Over the years, over the 20 years, the others had died off just from natural causes. And I never knew until Bob's death, the day of his death, that he even did that out there for me. But that's brotherhood, Pete. And you know, that's how it is with us. We're very protective of one another. So anyway, I survived the kill order. The FBI came and talked to me and let me know about 2 months after the strike that they did, in fact, round up a cell 65 miles north of the town I live in. And it was, people say the Beltran-Leyva organization no longer exists at that cartel. The Gulf Coast cartel was wiped out. But the players that were involved in this were the remnants of that particular cartel. And 30 years ago, I put Manuel Beltran, his grandson, in federal prison on a 10-year hit on a multi-kilo drug bust. And he did escape from that environment. So we always knew that someday, somehow, with the power of that family, that they would locate me. But then again, Pete, you know, 17 years undercover, a lot of that time, most of that time, was done on foreign soil outside of the United States. My specific purpose for the Department of Justice, specifically DEA, U.S. Customs, CIA, ATF, those organizations, would use me down there to infiltrate me into known organized crime families or cartel syndicates. And we'd take them from the inside out by doing that. So it's very highly dangerous work, extremely risky. And the one thing about the drug cartels, they are generational. So when there is a commitment or a kill order put out there, it never, ever dies. It gets passed to the next generation. And you've done enough interviews to know that. You've also been in foreign countries where they are like that. Those things they just don't go away. But the bottom line is this. I survived the attempted assassination on my life. I did continue on for a little bit longer. I had a mission in Sonora, Mexico shortly after that I completed. And when I made it back into the United States, the following morning, I rescinded my contract as a contractor and forever walked away from doing undercover work. That's when the concept of writing the books, the 12 novels I have out there, the autobiography I have out there, Pete, I knew the material was important and maybe this could benefit another person that has survived extreme crisis events in their own life and seeing that there is a humanitarian concept that awaits each and every one of us at the end of that trail. So it was the night of the attempted murder on me was the influencing factor that puts us to where you and I are on stage today. We're bringing these stories to the world so the world can see graphic, and I mean graphic and horrific survivorships done by so many of us out there. But the important thing is to show that even a PTSD damaged patient like myself, like you know, we can come out and we can take advantage of that knowledge and we can create a market of servitude and start reaching out into the communities like we both do and are doing to this day through this program to start helping some of these mom and pop operations that are out there that work directly with the afflicted, with the homeless community, with the addicted community, and try to try to help revive them and keep them going because their work is so important. That is why we attached a subscription and a donation slot to this particular program. This isn't some scam or some idea to make money or anything like that on a personal interest. This is a payback and a give back. And Pete, over the years, I've had so many people come to me and say, Pastor Bradley, what can we do to help? Well, I can't send them in a trap house. I can't send them in a
Right.
homeless camp because they're too darn dangerous. So we decided to come up with this program and give everybody an entry level appointment, if you will, to where they can start doing what they've been asking of me for now going on 2 decades.
Let me jump in here, Hal, because there's something I want to accentuate. So I'm drinking a coffee that I got at the local gas station market, and
yeah, I'm smoking cigarettes. Go for it.
Well, the reason I'm saying this is I was getting gas, and I was just going to get gas and head to the VA for some appointments. And this young gentleman said, "Hey, you got a couple of bucks?" And I thought I had a couple of bucks, and was glad to kind of give it to him because he needed it, and didn't have a couple bucks. And so I was getting gas, and I thought, man, I'm about to talk to Hal in a little bit here. And my default is to try to give aid when it's asked for.
Yes.
And so I said, hey, you know what? Why don't I go inside? And I was doing some lab work, so I was fasting, but I can still get a coffee and I can hold on to it for a little bit. So I'm like, why don't we go inside? And do you want a coffee? And he's like, because he'd asked for coffee. And I'm like, how about something to eat? He's like, man, that'd be great. And so I didn't spend much money, right? It was, I think it was a little less than $10 for 2 coffees. And then he bought like a burrito and a Danish,
Beautiful.
So, yeah. And that little bit of help, look, that doesn't change that person's life, but it does provide a little bit of comfort where he can go out, he can have a little bit of food in his belly and work on whatever is next in his life.
And somebody cared for him.
And somebody cared for him. Yeah. And, I did my best to not make it anything other than, I got a couple bucks to help you out. I didn't want to make him feel less, and when he was, thanking me, and I'm like, hey, I've had help. I help people. We help each other. This is,
it.
And so when you look at something like the Christ is Victory show and the contributions, like this is taking something like that. And instead of having to actively remember to do this or have $5 on you or whatever it is, you can just every month it comes out, and then Hal will put it to work in a way that's going into trap houses and dealing with these things directly. So there's really no more direct path than what you're doing already. So that's why I thought I'd spend a moment doing that. I want to get back into your story though, because when you get stabbed in the head with the intention of killing you, this is not your first near death or death adjacent encounter. But when you have this happen, there's recovery, physical for sure. But have you even finished recovering mentally from this attack? Do you feel safe? There are things that are residual from this attack, because that's as intimate a thing as possible, to have someone jamming a knife into your head with the intention of killing you.
Well, that's a good question, Pete. And I'll tell you, the biggest part of my PTSD, my trauma, probably stems from my captivity, where we were being moved through the jungle in El Salvador. Every other day they were moving us to what they called dry camps. And every day the expectation of myself and the undercover agent working with me who was captured, we anticipated death. And the lingering concept of death is the horrific side to going through trauma, because the thoughts, the feelings, the experience, if you will, never leaves. Do you remember me talking about when I was kidnapped in Culiacan on my way seeing the general, and how they strung me up and were beating me profusely? Yet all they were doing at that point, when they took me to that black site, was to try and extract information. How the hell much did I know? It wasn't a kill order on me in that moment, although I do believe, had I not been rescued from that particular incident, I probably would have been dumped in a ditch somewhere. It's just the way the world works. But yeah, you're right. It's a good point too. And folks, this is another reason why Pete has created the notice at the beginning of our shows, wanting you to understand the ramifications of PTSD. So when you hear something and you may not think it's credible or truthful by the people that we interview, in their mind it is truthful, and in their mind it is credible. And they do get their facts mixed up because they are still experiencing post-traumatic syndrome at a magnitude level. And I'm really glad you brought that up, Pete. Thank you for doing that. It's important the audience knows this. So yeah, there is a lot more than the physical. It took me months to recover from the physical. I had to sell my Harley Davidson last year after decades of riding, because I can no longer trust myself to not fall over. I do have those incidents. I walk with a cane now where I never did before. It was a life-changing experience. So a lot of other things come into play when we survive. a crisis event. And although they may all be unique under their own, like what you went through as a spy operating in the Middle East, my God, you're outside of that wire. And this, folks, is something that men like us thrive on and feed on and off of each other, because with PTSD, how do you explain the horrors of the ghosts that visit us in the night to somebody that doesn't have a visitation like we have to survive every day? And I want to emphasize to you that are veterans that are watching this, remember, we have the Veterans Crisis Hotline for suicide people. Veterans a day, Pete, in this country to suicide. Think of the magnanimity of that number, people that are non-veterans that are committing suicide as a result of dealing with PTSD in their own way. So yeah, this is a very important message to get to all of you about how you can not only survive multiple near-death experiences like I have. Pete probably has. We've never gone that deep into it. But the bottom line is there's a knowledge that is attained, a wisdom that is grafted from survivorship that makes us a better person to survive and serve, if you will, not only our communities, but the world as a whole. Every time we put a positive energy into something from a negative result, we end up making things a little bit better outside of our own realm. So, yeah, that being said, please proceed to the next question, my brother.
Well, so one of the things that I want to accentuate here is when you talk to someone that has PTSD, and not to be combat, doesn't have to be drug cartel related. How many women have been molested in some way, right?
Yes.
And so now you're trying to feel safe in an area, and if your body physically gets agitated to the point where your PTSD is triggering, it's not easy to be your best version of yourself, right? So when we talk about these people that we walk them through these experiences on the show, you're getting a lot of the residual pain that they have. And so now they get protective. They might get combative. They might lie. They might do a lot of things because we've cracked open a pretty significant wound in these people.
Yes, we have.
When I think about these wounds, and I always tell my friends and talk to people on my show, if you could see it on my arm, you would treat me differently than you do because you can't see it, right? And so when you think about these wounds, and the VA is like, Pete, tell me about the incident. And I'm like, the incident? Come on. I mean, guys like us, how we have incidents. Right, yeah. When you think about things that happened, and at the time, like I have an example of I was doing a source meet with a guy, and it's just people talking, right? If you saw me work, you were just like, Pete's just talking. And I'm sure it's the same for you. But there was a firefight started, and it didn't last long, but it was a firefight going on where we were kind of tucked away. We were on the street, but in a way that we weren't really worried about the firefight. And yet there's bits of building hitting me and the other guy in the face because there's automatic fire, and it changes direction, all these kind of things. It didn't even occur to me that was dangerous. That bits of building are hitting me in the face, and the bullets are hitting not that far away.
That's because you were in the moment. You were in the moment.
And the dude was in the moment. And it's just like you have a spell, and we're both in it. And I'm doing things that are hopefully going to save people's lives. My buddies are in a firefight. Their lives are at risk. I have to do my job, right?
Yes.
And so that's what I'm focused on. What I realized years later was that was a hugely damaging experience because my body is saying, get the hell out of there. Stop. But my combat brain is like, you have to focus on this. This guy's talking, and as long as he's willing to talk, we're going to talk. That's not all going to take care of itself. So when you look at your experiences, is there one that jumps to mind that's similar, where in the time, because you're in the mix, no big deal. But when you look back, you're like, man, how much damage did that do to me?
That's an amazing question. And there's a dream that comes to me frequently, and when we were being moved from camp to camp, when they hit the camp to do initiate a rescue on us in El Salvador, I remember this guy walking up to me, is ready to slam a couple rounds into me and to the agent that was beside me, and all of a sudden from behind him, he was literally blown into pieces, and I remember parts of him landing on my face, on my neck, and my shoulder, but I was bound. I couldn't wipe it away, and the horror of that memory in that moment will last. It'll stay with me forever. But my conclusion to this on that particular incident is we're not going to get rid of these memories, Pete. The ones you have, the ones I have, they're going to always be with us. But what we can do is pull them out of ourselves, examine them, and try to make peace with them and then put them back inside, because they will never, ever go away. And that is my solution. And as you know, I had told you earlier, this coming Friday will be my first PTS group at the VA hospital. And I've been a PTS patient for years. Never have before have I conceded or accepted the thought of being in a group. But the reason it was recommended by my PTSD doctor is because now that Captain Robert took his life, and I have no one aside from you and that I can communicate with him. With Captain Robert, I had him every day in my life for 20 years, and he would talk about his POW experiences. I had somebody I could relate to. So I'm in hopes, and I'm willing to try it, to work in a group forum of others that have survived extreme PTSD in a military fashion. And this will be my first time ever doing that this Friday. So I'll keep you posted. I'll let you know how it goes.
I'm interested. I've tried group therapy as well, and I haven't found it all that beneficial. But it doesn't mean that I'm not willing to try it again. You talked earlier about having pieces of a human fall around you. I have a similar experience.
I did.
We had a car bomber blow up his car literally outside of the door of my office. Now, between the car bomb and my office, there was a tall barrier of concrete. So we're safe from the blast, whatever that means. But bits of that dude's car and that dude hit on our little patio area. It's not a very big area. It's maybe 10 feet from the wall to our front door. But there's a hunk of what I thought to be thigh sitting there next to his part of his instrument panel.
Yes.
And again, these are the things where, like, that's not supposed to happen. You're not trained on how to deal with that. And then if you talk about it too much in the wrong setting, all of a sudden you're broken in the way that you're not broken. People want to assign you a certain level of damage. And it's like, how do I deal with this? How do I turn it off? You don't turn it off. You have to understand. So all of these things go into what you're talking about. And that seeing a human be dead, whether it's caused by you or caused by somebody else immediately, there is some impact from that when it becomes repetitive. And you see a lot of this just grievous harm brought for some minor reason. And in your line of work, people get killed as a penalty for a lot of things.
Well, normally when they get killed, they're not killed right away. What I've seen and bear witness to over the years with the cartels is the torture that they put people through. And I told you the experience of where Pat and I were taken down to Culiacan, went up in the hills, and we were brought to a ranch with a corral, and we saw all these young sicarios standing around the corral. And the two guys that took us from the airport to this ranch escorted us over to the corral, and they released 3 Rottweilers on this guy that was bound and bagged in the center of the corral, and they ate him alive right in front of us. The purpose of his execution was he was drawing too much attention, flamboyant attention, if you will, to the cartel that was representing him. And they were trying to teach us, quit buying gold chains and fancy cars and living in big houses, because you're way outside of your means of wealth that you're showing to the world. And that's going to draw heat, and they're going to backtrack it to us. And then we have a bigger problem. And I'll never forget it. After I watched that guy getting eaten alive, the jefe of the ranch turned to us, says, the next time you're called down here, you're going to be the ones in the corral. And boy, oh boy, Pat and I talked about that for years, and as you know, a couple of years ago, they executed Pat. We were coming out of my attorney's office. We saw 2 Mexican nationals in a silver SUV across the parking lot, paying attention to us. Right away, we thought they were targeting me. So Pat picks his phone up to his ear, and as soon as he did, they saw that. They bolted out of there. Well, what had happened was less than 48 hours later, they raided where Pat was at, held him down, shot a load of fentanyl into his body, and killed him on the spot. And Pat, Vietnam veteran, war hero, 101st Airborne, worked the Highlands. He was into the shit, and he himself dealt with extreme PTSD, but he was extremely protective for me. We had 30 years of building a drug empire together, and a lot of history there, a lot of risks there. But you just never know when the trauma is going to come and where it's going to come from. And I dedicated A Fox on the Lion's Den to Pat Grady. There's a picture of him on the book as you open it up. And folks, that's the purpose of the dedication, how he gave his life for his brother. And I know that when he was being held down and they drammed that load of fentanyl into his body, that he was looking into his assassin's eyes. And that was the last thing that Pat probably saw or did see on this earth. Another form of PTSD, surviving these environments. is the loss and sacrifice and the grief process we go through as we hang on to the memories of what those we loved, we served with, encountered numerous occasions, life and death scenarios. Pat and I were around a lot of that in my many years of working in the drug cartels in Mexico. First as a smuggler, later as the Pacific Northwest's largest cocaine trafficker for that particular cartel in America. I was the primary target, as you know, of Operation Northern Exposure. Finally made the choice to walk in '93 because I had just come back from Culiacan. I was told I was out, and I come home to a third of a ton of cocaine sitting in my driveway and 2 soldiers waiting for instruction. And because of the level that I was at and growing up with all those guys in the younger years of life, I was respected and revered by so many of these young upstart soldiers. And I turned the load around the next day, walked into the U.S. Attorney's office and said, screw it, let's take this down. But look at the door that opened, because that was the moment of change and transference from going from something that was so evil and so bad to society, to myself, to my family, that in the time of my conversion, all that I wanted to do was figure out a way to pay back everybody that I could possibly pay back and devote the rest of my life to serving humankind. Specifically, the very type of people that at one time I didn't care if they used drugs or not, didn't bother me. I was making money. But sometimes a critical event, a crisis event, can change the path that you find yourself on. And that's what happened to me, Pete. And I completed seminary while I was in federal prison and worked all the way up through my bachelor's. Finally, in 2004, getting my doctoral degree in Christian pastoral counseling. I have a master's degree in metaphysics science, which is an opposite. But a lot of people say, Pastor, why did you do metaphysics? Isn't that against God? Isn't that paganistic? And I said, well, when you go to introduce somebody to what you believe in within yourself, in my case, is Jesus, I said, isn't it a better approach if you understand where they're coming from first? And that's why I studied metaphysical sciences so extensively, so I would be able to communicate with somebody on their level, showing them in a respect of understanding why they believe the way they do, and then being able to introduce my faith, my belief, by example, not by words, but by example. And as you know, Pete, this is my 19th, going into my 20th year of working in trap houses and working in the homeless community, of having people knock on my door in the middle of the night and dropping off another rape victim or an overdose case. And folks, the reason they do this is because most of these people have felony warrants out for their arrest. So they don't want to be taken to a hospital where they're going to get treated, arrested, and then they're going to end up being dope sick, sitting in jail while they're kicking drugs. It's not my place to judge whether they're a drug user or not. It's my place to serve whoever God sends to my door. And that's it in a nutshell. So yeah.
That ability to, again, this goes back to our combined experience. Yes. I'm talking to someone. My job is to make friends with warlords, and people who are dangerous. And these people are dangerous because they're protecting the lives of other people. And sometimes it's criminal. Sometimes it's extra legal. When I say extra legal, what I mean is this person is selling gas to survive in Iraq.
Yes.
I don't care about that. I want you to be okay. And if I can take because if I don't know bad people, I can't prevent bad things. And so when you meet these warlords, or you meet these sheikhs or these tribal elders that have a lot of combat experience, I have to relate to them in a different way. I can't be judgmental. I have to be like, oh, you're a combat guy, so am I. Here's what I'm trying to do. What are you trying to do?
Interesting.
When you do that, if you assign blame or judgment because something doesn't fit my norm, that's not going to work.
Yes.
So I guess when you are looking at this and you're taking these hits from people who are doing the evil things, you still have to do business with them. Whether you're on the market side or on the enforcement side, you're still swallowing a lot of that poison because it doesn't fit your norm, which is just your norm. You're not changing that, but you do have to account for what their norm is and try to bridge that gap. It's not easy, and most people can't do it. And that's why guys like us exist, because we have the ability to turn off part of us to accept something that is very uncomfortable for anybody else.
I'm glad that you touched on that, because living in an undercover capacity, I did for 17 years. I know you did for years too. it sometimes becomes very complicated to switch on and off on those two designs of who you are within yourself. One,
Mhm.
your role playing when you're infiltrating a criminal organization, or in your case, seeking intelligence gathering. You're infiltrating their culture, their environment, and you got to make sure that you blend to a degree where there's no suspicion put on you, that your intent becomes obvious and a comfortable platform with them. And then when you leave that, you got to pull back into the world that you just came out of. And you know, Pete, I struggled with that for a few years. I was installed as a senior pastor of my own church, and at the same time, I was jumping off on missions south of the borders. And I remember one time I was down there, I was in a brothel doing a 500-kilo cocaine meet that we were setting up to do. And the very next no, maybe 2 days later, I fly back stateside and I've got to prepare a sermon for my Sunday church. And here I am remembering being in a whorehouse, negotiating a drug deal, and I'm going to get up there and preach the gospel of Christ. So what I had to do is I had to go to my bishop and I had to ask for a 4-year sabbatical so I could continue with my work. And he believed in my cause to such an extent that he granted it. But he, like so many that are outside of the wire that you and I have served outside of, they just don't get it. They don't understand how hard it is to bounce back and forth between these two existences within oneself. And it really becomes a complexity. But you have to immerse yourself, if you will, into the moment of whatever world that you're residing in that moment. And you've got to pull it off, because if you don't, you're going to get your ass cut up and shoved into a barrel that's going to get sealed, and it's going to be found floating in the damned ocean. I mean, it's everything requires no mistakes at all. And after a while, you've been there. It gets to you. But moving on from that statement, I would like to say, and it's hard to remember that stuff, but it's okay. This also enhances our ability to start doing better for what I call the payback. You know, when I made the commitment to get into seminary and learn all that I learned, as you know, I was a hospice counselor with federal prisoners while I was in Springfield, Missouri, before I went to Leavenworth. And I took 24 prisoners through the dying process during that time. But also in those death rooms that I worked in as a fellow prisoner with them, those were the nights where I would do my seminarial studies. And you talk about a humbling experience doing seminary in death rooms in a prison where you don't have the fortitude of having family or community support. You're all on your own in your own right. And I do believe that God, the Father above us all, put me in those rooms for specific purposes, because the ministry, coming out, completing my doctorate, getting reordained under a Seattle bishop, and being put into outreach services right away before I went into being installed 3 years later with my own church, gave me the ability to take the knowledge that came from living a comparable lifestyle to the very people that I'm now serving, those that are in the alleys and on the streets and sleeping under cardboard with the rain falling on them and people walking around them, instead of doing as we have learned to do, which is to bend down, sit down, and have some compassion for them. And brothers and sisters that are hearing this, if you've ever gone through a hardcore lifestyle that was not benefiting anybody but your own darn self, let me tell you, there's a greater reward when you can be the one that sits on the sidewalk with that homeless person. Put an arm around them. Don't worry about how they smell or how they look or how they don't make sentence communicating as normal people do. Instead, just show them some, by example, sincere compassion and sincere understanding. And there's nothing wrong, like the proverbial cup of coffee and burrito that you gave that man. That action, folks, life changed that person. And like Pete said, his hope is that that would carry on through him to some other person. And that's how we build the love, and that's how we build the trust, and that's how we start the beginning of rebuilding based from the evil sides of our lives, or servitude, as Pete was. He was never not evil like I was. But we can take the knowledge from that, and we can further enhance our communities, our families, and our planet. And I feel real strong about that, Pete. And that's why we have the Crisis Victory Show. That's why today you and I are having this open discussion, showing extremes to the other extreme. And it's a beautiful thing. I really thank God daily for putting the unconscious rape victim on my porch at 3 o'clock in the morning, for some guy bringing his girlfriend here who's been unconscious because of a fentanyl overdose. And the Veterans Administration provides my Narcan kits. So I always have a stock on supply, and people know they can come to the pastor because he's not going to call the police. He's not going to put anybody in what they consider to be harm's way for their lifestyle. And the other thing, Pete, is we never know their story. We don't know what put them there. So this gives them and affords them an opportunity to be able to share why their life is the way it is, because they know that you're not some guy with a PhD that grew up in an upper middle class lifestyle and never experienced what they have experienced. A trust initiative becomes enabled almost immediately because they can sense that you and I, have been different than the society that has been putting them down and judging them and being non-committal to their needs. And this is why I get back to the importance of these small mom and shop little operations that I deal with in my community forum here, that they're out there operating to serve this community, and they're struggling to do so. So I really want to put an emphasis, even if it's not with us, by God, that's a way you can help people out there that are going through that. I really feel strong about that, and I commend each and every one of them. And one of the ones we'll be donating to, Pete, is a mother-daughter operation, and they do a community wellness program that's directed right to the afflicted that live on the streets. As you know, I'm house sitting a dog right now for a guy pulling 3 months in a drug rehab center. And the lady's daughter came to me and asked permission to take the dog for a walk once a week. So she's doing follow-up, not only after he's been discharged from their program and he's incarcerated right now, but they're still doing a continuance so that when he calls once a week, they can say, hey, we saw your dog today and looking great, and other outside interests and activities that are important to him are now being shared and displayed. So, folks, these small little enterprises that do this type of work, they're tremendous in their calling. And we should, as a society, support them. Period. End of story.
No. When you look at the damage, and it's not even knowable, but the damage that is caused when you build the giant Northwestern drug market that you built.
Yes.
Are you able to ever get that weight off your back, or are you forever going to have to not only do the work yourself, but amplify it by helping these small mom and pop places and these mom and daughter places that help people? How do you calculate, or how do you manage the cost of what you were doing?
That's a really good question, Pete. I deal and struggle with that every day of my life. But it's something an agent said to me when I had put in for my retirement at the end of it all, after 17 years undercover, doing my best to pay back for the 15 years that I was a smuggler and an international narcotraficante. This agent calls me up to say goodbye, thank me for my service, and said, Hal, you've paid your debt. And that always rings with me, because I know that God has forgiven me. I know that a lot of the agents that I worked with in an undercover capacity came to know me and came to like me, and most importantly, came to trust me. So when I stepped down after all those years of doing that type of incredibly dangerous work, there was a gratitude, a fulfillment, and now a new directed desire to go out to the very community that 30 years ago I was destroying. I was a major problem in decimating families, businesses, everything, as a result of my greed and my hunger for power to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And now it's turned into something. I live, as you know, very meek, very humble. I have to struggle to pay my bills every month, just like so many other Americans do. And I'm really, really good with all of that. So the answer to your question on that, Pete, is yes, I do have peace of mind finally, that I have been able to contribute instead of afflict the community and the country and the world that I live in. Thank you for that, brother.
Yeah, no, it's needed, because again, we're trying to illustrate things that we've experienced or witnessed, and
Right.
the judgment, sometimes at my worst, I wasn't a great person. I had a lot of problems. I didn't treat people the way I normally would, but I was deeply wounded. And some days, and I still have these days, where instead of having the bar up on the roof and trying to jump over the roof every damn day, because that's what guys like us try to do, I
Yes.
realize that some days you can just put the bar on the floor and just not jump over an 8-foot or a 10-foot or 100-foot barrier. You can just simply have a bad day, and a bad day is a good day because that's what you've got available. It takes a long time to get that kind of humility. The ways we live is very modest, and we do great things. It's less about us, and it's more about how do I create some balance in the world when there is so much imbalance and there is so much suffering.
Well, right now, Pete, somebody will be watching this show in the next day or two or when we release. And what's going to happen is they're going to be someone that's either a high-level drug trafficker or someone like yourself that's a veteran watching it on his computer in foreign land, and he's going to be an answer to his question: Can I ever change from that which I have become as a result of my choices? So here we are showing them how to change, and that's a beautiful thing. So all of you survivors out there, I want that to really set into you. You know, you have a knowledge that so many others don't have. You have an ability now to take forth with that knowledge and do the goodness and the kindness and the compassionate thing with that knowledge. And people will come and trust you like they did with me, like they do with Pete. We're trusted because people can sense the truth in our reality instantly because they're hurt, they're damaged. They tried to go through regular societal programs and things like this that don't work. You heard what Pete said earlier. I tried to do PTSD group therapy. It didn't work for him. Well, hell, I'm nervous as hell trying it myself. But, you know, the point is try anything, try everything that's going to self-improve your ability to maybe put those ghosts to rest at night so you can wake up in a positive sense of following day. Be thankful for the fact that you're even waking up in our cases, and to go out there and kind of do some good. Buy that guy a cup of coffee and a burrito that you've never talked to before in your life. Put an arm around a guy that people are walking around and take the moment to listen to his story. But folks, if you're not trained in doing this type of work, do not put yourself in harm's way. This is why we created the donation site. And, you know, we're only looking at like either $3 a month or $5 a month or $10 a month. I think that's what the tab said. We just created this with the show. And so we're not asking, but we're wanting is to see the growth by numbers. We want to see tens of thousands of people come forth and go, wow, I finally have a way where I can really do some good here. And that is our motivation, folks. That's the whole purpose of it. And that is why today Pete and I decided as the co-hosts on the show is to get that word out to you. There is a way to help, and we'll get it to the right people. We know exactly who is struggling right now and in need of these things. The Salvation Army, the Volunteers of America, these big organizations get grants from state, federal, government level agencies, so they're going to continue on. But what about the little mom and pop shop that's on the corner down there whose grant funding just ran out? But by now, they have established themselves to their immediate community, and they're doing good work. We need to help. We need to help these people. So,
no, that's great. I'd like to dedicate this episode to your buddy Pat, and so I'm going to put his picture up as we tune out. But first, I'm going to run the outro. But so, thanks, Hal, to you and for doing this with me and letting me take over your microphone. I'm honored to have that honor, and I appreciate.
Thank you, Pete.
Yes.
Thank you, Pete.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, before I close, this is Pete Turner of the Break It Down Show. I've been a guest on his show. I've watched dozens of his interviews. And Pete, you do an amazing work, and you're really helping a lot of us in the community also by what you transcribe, by letting people tell what's going on in their lives. So remember, folks, Pete Turner, the Break It Down Show. He's my co-host and co-producer of the Crisis Victory Show. An amazing man. You're doing wonderful things, Pete. I love you with all my heart. You know I do.
All right, let me roll this video here.
Okay, folks. Well, that wraps up another episode today, and I'd like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to catch our show. Now, if you like these shows, I would ask that you would please hit like, share, and subscribe. It's so important to us that we get these messages out, and we understand that these are graphic, almost toxic interviews. But, you know, this is the kind of impact that we feel is needed in order to make sure that people understand the significance of the problems that we are confronted within our own country and around the globe. So I'm going to say at this time that I love you all. God bless you all. Hasta luego, y vaya con Dios, and go Victors.